Hello everyone, and welcome to our fourth unit of Advanced Leveling class. And in this unit, we will be discussing materials. And in the next unit, we will expand on our discussion on materials and how the materials are created in Unreal. And as you have noticed from the first class, you applied a bunch of really neat looking materials to your particle emitter, which emitted some sort of steamy kind of things. And also you applied materials to your level on the walls and on the objects that you created to get what actually you can see as far as stunning visual beauty and clarity of the Unreal. We need to be able to master the material creation. Perhaps these are the single most important factor in the final look of your game and how your game would absolutely look amazing to the viewers. If you want to create specific visual details on the face of a character, or to create unrealistic and somehow dangerous looks of your on the different parts of your level, you would have to be able to accomplish that by creating materials. Materials are extremely interesting and extremely easy in a sense to set up in the Unreal game. And what they essentially entail is how your material engine in the Unreal Engine basically will be able to design the interaction between light and different material expressions that we will be discussing a little bit later to create those looks. The very simplest way to look at and think of what materials are is basically the paint on the surfaces that you have. Although paint typically controls only the color of objects, a material can be used for an object to create somehow complex geometry on the face of the object. For example, the lumpy look, shininess, reflection, and refractive materials, wrinkles, scars, and other kinds of geometric complexities that your objects may have. You can convey them through materials. So you can create a very simple low polygonal mesh in the Unreal Engine, and then create very complex looks on your material on your objects by just applying materials and manipulating materials to convey that look for you. And we will see how we can achieve that by using materials in your game. If you're new to game design, you may have difficulty understanding what is the difference between a material and a texture. A texture is basically an image, but a material is the combination of a variety of different factors and elements, including texture. So texture is one part of a material, but material is made of these textures, and then you can add more expressions to your textures to make them the look, or to give them the look that your material and the end product of the material would have. So essentially, textures are basically a part of the materials, and we'll see. One thing that you need to remember is that textures have coordinates. What that means is that if you have a texture, you can apply that texture, but by manipulating the coordinates of the texture, you can make the texture move on your material, rotate on the material. You can make the texture to kind of zoom in or zoom out of the texture on the space of your material. And essentially, you can determine how the texture will be applied to every single pixel on the surface of your objects. So, in a sense, texture coordinates are the things that dictate the wrapping of your materials around your three-dimensional objects. So this wrapping is done by texture coordinates. These, we also call them UVs, or UV coordinates. The bottom left of the material, so if you look at a surface, like the surface of this object here, actually this is a mesh. Let me just create an object here, a simple cube. Okay, so I'm building this simple cube brush, and I build an additive geometry here. So this is basically the brush that I created. If I apply a texture on top of this material, the UVs start at the bottom left corner, so this coordinate 0, 0 is going to be at the bottom left, and then from 0 to 1, your coordinates, your texture coordinates, u coordinates, go from 0 to 1 horizontally, and the v coordinates go from 0 to 1 vertically along the z-axis in this material. We also can refer to these materials or to this UV coordinate as a tangent space. Each vertex of a surface has a value that corresponds to a UV coordinate on the texture, and the texture is painted on the surface according to the texture coordinates on your material. So every surface on these materials will have their own UV coordinates, which can be set with your surface properties on the ESP dialog boxes that appear if you click on a surface and basically select the surface and then right click on it and choose the surface property. The UV coordinates are basically the coordinates that you see here. You can pan your textures by moving 16 or 4 or 64 units, as you see here what I'm doing. So when I pan my textures along the V direction, you see that the textures move. You can manipulate them by rotating the texture at 45 degrees, by flipping it, flipping U or V coordinates, and or applying any other kinds of texture alignment on your surfaces. Now what happens when you have a three-dimensional object like this that I have here, and then you have your model's UV texture coordinates, then you add the two with the texture map that you have, and that will create the model with the texture that you have on it. One important aspect of creating materials in Unreal is through texture instructions, and we're going to use this the word instructions because when you're programming your materials, if you were a hardcode programmer, you could literally create and write a mathematical expression for your material, and then you could apply those expressions with code instructions, such as adding two things, multiplying things with each other, subtracting things with each other, applying a sort of sign or mathematical formula on them, or even non-mathematical formula. For example, bring the texture from a BMP file and apply it on a surface, and all that sort of stuff are called instructions. We use these instructions in a more visual way, and I'll show you how you can create these instructions, and you can pass these commands or the instructions one after another to your graphics processor to handle various material behaviors. That being said, you now should know that your materials are made of textures and other things that you can use instructions to, in a cascade way, or basically one after another, to pass them through to your graphics card to create the material behaviors. And of course, every material is made up of colors. When you think of colors, colors in Unreal are essentially floating point values that you can use, and because they're made of three primary colors, red, green, and blue, your colors are most of the time are in the form of a three-dimensional vector. One value for R, red, one value for G, green, and one value for B, blue component of your colors. And therefore you'll have three values for RGB colors, and they range from 0 all the way to 255, or from 0 all the way to 1 in real numbers. If you use negative values for your color, that means that you're taking that much value and removing that color from your materials, and we will see how these essentially work. Sometimes you want to imply some sort of transparency of the color that you see, and that is done through what we call an alpha channel. So when you see a four-dimensional vector or a color that has four values, the first three values are for red, green, blue, or RGB values, and the last value that ranges from 0 to 1 is just for transparency of your material, or the alpha value of your material. Now finally it comes to the light. Your materials will not be observable or seen in the scene that you have if it weren't because of their interaction with the light. So whatever material we create essentially comes from, or when we see it, its visual representation comes from the material expression themselves and the interaction of those material expressions with the light. We will expand on the light after we're done with the materials. So let me show you what a material essentially would look like. If you click on your content browser, before we start creating any materials, you will see the contents that are set up on in Unreal, and they are the default contents. And if you click on material box here, the materials will show up. And let me just choose one of these materials and just open it for you so you'll see how it actually looks like. The cube material here, for example. If you double click on it, the material expression will show up, and you will see here how the material editor is set up, and the expressions are set up to create this particular material. And each of these blocks that you see here is a material expression. So the material expressions are cascaded one after another, and then eventually the result of that expression, or the set of expressions, will be fed into several channels of the material object. This is the material object, or the material node, and here the emissive channel of that material node has been activated or has input, and this creates your material and how it looks like. Let's start with creating a basic material, and then I'll show you how to create basic materials and then how to go about and create more complex materials. So close the material editor for now and uncheck the materials from your default. So if you remember from the previous examples that I showed you, I asked you to copy the package that you had to a folder under the content, under the GMNG4316. And here I have a subfolder called Volume 1, and I already added Chapter 6 materials to my content browser. If it's the first time that you're using that package, you need to right-click on it, and when you right-click on it, you could choose the fully load option, and that automatically loads all the materials and contents that are created for you within that package. And if you left click on the little arrow icon next to the package, you will see that there's a folder within that package that has all the materials in it. So what I want you to do is to right click somewhere in the gray area and choose new material. And when you click on new material, you want to add this material in the Chapter 06 materials package. So what I want you to do is to create a new grouping and call this My Materials. And then under the name, choose mat-my mat01. And what it does is that it creates a new material in the Chapter 06 materials package, and it creates a subfolder for it under My Materials, and then it gives it the name my mat01, and then it's already using Material Factory. So click OK, and the material editor will show up, and you will see how the material editor looks like with an empty material. Okay, now for now I'll minimize this, and here is how your material looks like for now. It doesn't have any texture samples and no instructions. So your material is basically made of just the default texture, which is the checkerboard. And it is placed under My Materials folder within your Chapter 6. Okay, now I'll restore the material expression editor, and I'll just go over basics of this material expression for you, and then we'll start working with our first material. So on the top of the material editor, you see a bunch of icons. The first icon to the left is basically saving your material expressions that you have created so far, and then you can toggle the grids off or on. You don't have any material expression yet, so you won't see any grids. This is used when you have a translucent to transparent material, so you can see through it. The next set of icons are the way that your material, or a sample object that the material will be applied on, The left is the cylinder, so it creates a cylindrical object, a cube object, a sphere object, or a plane, and then it applies your materials. 2, you can find the material from the content browser. When you find it, you can apply it to the static mesh from the content browser. You can clean the unused expressions. For example, if I click here, it cleans all the unused expressions with my material, and then I can apply changes to the material that I have. You can show or hide used or unused content. So right now I don't have any channels that are used. So if I click on it, it hides them all. Hides all the channels that I have. Then you can toggle the real-time material in the viewport or in the material expression viewport, and you can toggle the expression real-time preview. When you have expressions, if this is on, you would see your materials in real time, how they look like. This is useful when your materials move or you have dynamic material. You can toggle your material statistics. You can view the source code for your material. Here is how your material looks like in C++ code. So if you're a coder, you can basically click on toggle the source and you can manipulate your materials in a more advanced way. You can search a type here, and you can basically apply them, or you can create a two-dimensional material for mobile devices. To the right here, you will see two different views. You can choose your material expressions from the list that you see here, or you have a material function library that you can choose from. So these are the functions that you can have, and you can choose them and apply, for example, and bring them in. We won't go to those details. At the bottom here, you will see properties of your material. If you have a physical material, you can apply several properties to them. You can have a physics material, you can have physics material mask, different UV channels, and so forth that you can apply. You can manipulate your material property itself. You can change the blending from opaque to translucent, to mask, to additive, to modulate, and so forth. For now, we work with opaque materials. Opaque means that you cannot see through the material, like a metal surface or plastic surface. You can change the lighting mode of your material. Usually, the basic lighting mode is Fung, which is called MLM_Fung. And if you have taken any graphics course, you know basic Fung material and how or lighting and how it is set up. You can have a non-directional material, and if you click on Fung or non-directional, you will automatically see different channels of your material will be activated. So for Fung materials, you have a diffuse channel, you have an emissive channel, you have a specular channel, and for specular and diffuse, you have powers that indicate how the spread of that channel is. You have a transmission mask, transmission color channel, you have a normal channel that activates three-dimensional surface and bumpiness of your material, and you have a world position offset for your materials. If you move to, for example, a non-directional, you will only have diffuse and emissive channel, and your material will not have any specular component to it or any other component. You can choose, for example, an unlit channel, and the unlit channel basically allows you to create materials that you can create for and apply emissive component, basically the way that your material would shine from inside, and then you can write several expressions to create the look of your material in a more custom way, and you can just choose the custom lighting, and there you will be able to define your own lighting components on your material. So for now, we'll just use the Fung lighting material. If you click on two-sided material, especially when you have a translucent material, then you can have different material expressions and have them shine on both sides of your material so you could see them through, and several other expansions that you can have, and we won't go over them for now. So let's just create a basic material. So you have here your empty material set up, and what we want to do is we want to create a basic color or a diffuse color that would be applied on the surface of our object. So for now, let's just put a vector, a three-dimensional vector for RGB colors, and just apply that on our material. So if you hold the key 3 and left click, a three-dimensional vector for your color will be, or constant vector for your color will be created. Subsequently, you can also right click somewhere in the gray area here and choose from constants a new constant 3 vector. These two are basically the same things. Now let's delete one of them. And then if you click on the constant vector, you will see that you have R, G, and B, and then you have the description. In the description, let's type diffuse color. And then from the R, G, and B, let's just put some values. For example, 75 for R, 56 for G, and 32 for B. And this creates an RGB color. And you see here. If you wanted to choose the color from the color chooser, you can double click somewhere on the color area here, and then you can move this little circle on the color selection tool, and then you can choose the hue for your color, and then you can change the saturation for the color, the value of the color, how strong that color is, and the amount of the color, all the way from the alpha value, the transparency for your color. Okay. And when you apply, you choose that, then you can apply the new material to your color, or color to your material, and then hold the left click button on the left side output channel for the material expression and move it all the way to the diffuse channel, and when the channel turns yellow, then leave the left click. That would connect the diffuse color that you created and connect it to the diffuse of the material. And here's how your material would look like in the material viewport. Now with the left click you can rotate the material around. With right click you can zoom in and out and see how the material looks under a specific light. And your light is somewhere up here, so you see that the material shines. And so at the bottom here the material is darker, and from where the light shines the material looks brighter. Now you can apply this material to your objects. What you need to do is to apply changes to the material. When you left click on the check mark here, the material will be applied, and here's how your material looks like. Right click on the material and then choose save. And that would save your material to the package, and you see the asterisk is gone from the material. While your material is selected in the content browser, you can right click in your level and then apply material matte by matte 01, which is your material. When you apply it, it will be applied to your object. And you can choose other surfaces and apply your material to those surfaces as well. And then you can build your lighting. Make sure that you uncheck the light mask, and here is how your material would look like under this lighting condition, especially for this level. Let's go to the material editor one more time. Now I want specifically go over all the components that you have here, and I'll talk about the ones that we will be using essentially as we go on. But I would strongly encourage you at this point to just go ahead and read about material channels that you have and try them out on your Unreal editor and see how they basically work. So as you saw here, the diffuse channel for your material shows how your material looks like. Okay, let's go about and see how the specular component looks like. The specular component of your material, or specular channel of your material, is about the shininess that your material has. So the smoother the surfaces, the more shiny they are. And specular power control that shininess. Now, let me just bring another three-dimensional vector here by pressing the key 3 and left clicking somewhere. And let's just choose a brighter color, such as a brighter green here. Okay, so this will be my specular channel. And I apply that by clicking on OK. And then I apply that and mix that to the specular component. So what you see here is that the material not only is pink on the surface, but it also has some sort of greenish shininess, that when light hits that surface, it reflects back with a greenish color from the surface. So if I zoom in, you see the greenness on the surface here. Okay, and of course, because the light comes from up here, its direction of incidence is this way, and of course, the material shininess shines out. By clicking on an expression and while holding control, you can drag your expression around and basically place them where you want them. Now, the specular power dictates how big of a highlight you will have, a specular highlight you will have on the surface. And the larger the specular power is, the smaller and the more focused and concentrated that highlight is. Now, to show you how it works, I right-click from the constant, I choose a new constant, and then type in a value like 5 for the R, and then connect it to the specular power. So with the value 5, you see the specular highlight is bigger. Now if I increase the value 5 to 50, the specular highlight becomes more focused and smaller. So my material is now a lot more shiny, as you see here, and the highlight basically reflects back. Okay, so here's how it looks like. If you decrease this value to, for example, 0.1, you'd see that the specularity is larger. And 1 is a constant value that dictates how much your specularity is. So 500 is very, very high in specularity, so the light reflects back on a very small surface. The emissive channel, as it says, it's how much light is emitted out of your material. So if I create a three-dimensional vector one more time here by holding value 3 and left-clicking and choosing a color, now I put a bluish color here for this emissiveness. Okay, and then connect that to the emissive component. Your material, on top of the pink color that it has, it also shines a blue color out. So if you apply this material now to a darker area, you see that now your material is shining blue when there's no light actually hitting the surface. And on the other sides of the material here, where you have the lights shining back, you have the pink reflection off of the surface, as well as the blue emissive component of your material. So if I hold Alt key and left click on the diffuse channel, you'll see that the connection of the diffuse color is deleted. So you can delete a connection by left clicking while pressing the Alt key, and so the material is only shiny, just shines blue, as you see here. So it just emits the blue color and doesn't have any diffuse pink color on its surface. Okay, so here's basically the basics of your manipulating the colors of your materials. And next we'll talk about textures on the materials and how you can bring, instead of just a color, you can unwrap textures on the surfaces of your materials.